All right, World War II ends in Europe with what is known as VE Day, standing for Victory in Europe Day. The date is May 8th, 1945. That is a date you have to know. We've had some others in this chapter, in the prior chapter, that you have to know, right? Just a few. Traditionally, when we teach World War II, we teach it by front. So we teach Europe and North Africa, then we teach Asia. But I want to stress to you that the fighting is going on in the Pacific while the fighting is going on in Europe. Especially as U.S. Citizens, you should know that we never quit fighting out west. It's not like we ignored Japan while we took care of Hitler. We were still making progress. Okay, in the Pacific, after the Pearl Harbor attacks, the Japanese are still on the offensive. They've weakened us. They haven't stopped us, but they've got some time to do some additional damage out there. And they move pretty quickly to take the Philippines. That island group is pretty rich in resources. It's very strategically located for the Japanese, and so it's important to them that they capture them. The commander of our land forces in the Pacific is General Douglas MacArthur. He is stationed in the Philippines and is campaigning, appealing to the Joint Chiefs of Staff for supplies, for reinforcements. You got to get us something. Well, you guys have studied the maps now. You know how far away the Philippines are, right? We don't have jets, no jumbo jets, no transports. Okay, everything's got to go by sea, and that is a long cruise out to the Philippines. And where are the supplies going? The few supplies we have at the beginning of the war, where are they headed? Europe, to save Britain. Because if Britain falls, it's us against the world at that point. And so they're like, we're going to try and get you all we can, but, you know, you kind of got to hold on. And it gets more and more and more desperate. And the Japanese, they're close, right? They can reinforce, they can resupply, and the Philippines fall. Shortly before the fall of the Philippines, the troops had retreated to off the island of Bataan to an island called Corregidor, where they were basically in a fortified bunker under a mountain. MacArthur intended to stay. He was a fighting general, or he believed he was a fighting general, and he intended to stay with his men to the end. A direct order from Roosevelt is brought to Corregidor to him that says, I understand where you're coming from, but you are too valuable. Get your hiney out of there. So General MacArthur and his wife Jean and their son Arthur MacArthur are evacuated by PT boat to the still British-held territories of Australia and New Zealand. And from there, MacArthur will direct all of the land forces in the Pacific in their island hopping campaign. It's called island hopping, not just because we hopped from one island to another, but because we hopped over islands. You guys have seen the map of Oceania. There's too much out there. If we had to capture every single island in a row along the way, we might still be fighting World War II in the Pacific. Okay? So the plan that MacArthur devised is we'll bypass some of the most heavily fortified islands. We'll capture the ones that have strategic importance to us in terms of a good harbor or a long airstrip for our bombers. And when we've gotten the territory, then we'll go back and we'll clean up what's left behind. Okay? It's kind of like when your parents have been out of town for the weekend and it's Sunday evening and you know they're going to be home in a little bit and you look around the house and you're like, uh-oh. You know you can't possibly clean everything from ceiling to floor, right? But you hit the big things. You run the vacuum, you wipe down the countertop, you empty the trash cans, you do the big stuff, right? You're island hopping when you're doing that. Okay? All right. The Japanese stay on the offensive in the Pacific until they get to attacking the island of Midway. Now we know Midway is midway across the Pacific. Are you with me now, Will?
Yeah.
Okay. Mallory, stop distracting Will.
I was looking at you, and he was trying to egg me on.
Will. Oh, I skipped what the Bataan Death March was. Sorry. So, when the Japanese captured the Philippines, go back to that idea of honor and dedication and service that the Japanese have that gives them the samurai tradition. The Japanese believe it is dishonorable to surrender. You should die fighting. All Japanese soldiers absolutely believe that to their core. So if you believe that it's completely dishonorable to surrender, how do you feel about people who surrender to you? They have no honor. No honor. And so you do not treat them with respect. They gave up. You would have died fighting, they gave up. So what the Japanese do is they take the prisoners off the island of Corregidor back to Bataan, and they're going to march them across Bataan to put them on ships to take them back to prisoner of war camps in Japan. 65 miles, pretty much day and night, virtually nonstop, no food, no drink. March them. Step out of line, bayonet. Stumble and fall and don't get yourself right back up, bayonet. Now these are guys, they haven't been eating prime rib and potatoes every day. They're already weak and underweight. They've been living on half rations and less than half rations for a long time because supplies were so short. Okay? So they're already weakened. One of the real tragedies about the Bataan Death March and the prisoners of war from the Philippines is the Japanese put them on transports to send them back to Japan. Well, those are the same transports that they used to transport their troops. And they're moving some troops off of the Philippines to other islands. It's not an express nonstop. And they didn't flag the vessels as being carrying POWs or anything. So we know for sure that one of the vessels carrying survivors who were captured by the Japanese, we torpedoed it because it was a Japanese troop transport. Yeah, kind of a bummer on that. Douglas MacArthur makes his famous vow, I shall return to the Philippines, and he does eventually. So back to Midway. The Japanese were making plans. We knew they wanted to have all the islands. They want all the islands. And we were getting very close to breaking their secret code. The code breakers were pretty sure they had it down. And they had a guess of a few islands that the Japanese were talking about invading. And the code breakers came up with an idea to trick the Japanese into revealing which island, because we had enough of their code broken. Not every message that you send in wartime, you don't have time to send it in code. It takes time to encode it, and then it takes time to decode it. And some stuff you just send what's called in the clear. You just send, hey, we're out of toilet paper here on Wake Island. Can we get some more TP? Okay? So they fly a message out to Midway, because we can't be sure the Japanese haven't gotten our codes, right? And that message says, transmit this in the clear with your regular morning messages tomorrow. So in the morning, they transmit, our water condenser is broken, send these parts. Okay? That afternoon, as they're breaking Japanese messages, it says, target XYZ has a broken water condenser, go ahead with attack plans. Ta-da! Why the Japanese would repeat that? You're on a tiny island in the middle of a saltwater ocean. If your water condenser is broken, what's that mean?
You don't have anything.
Limited rations of drinking water for your troops, and so what's going to happen to them? They're going to be dehydrated, they're going to be weak. Let's go ahead and attack them, right? Pretty cool. So we knew they were coming. The problem is Midway is a single island smack in the middle of this vast ocean. Okay? The island is at a fixed point. But the Japanese fleet could be coming from Lorelei anywhere. 360 degrees from that island they could be coming. So we send our 3 carriers out there to try and find them and stop the amphibious attack force. Imagine we go up to the North Gym. You've got all of that floor up there, right? And I tell you, the Japanese are going to attack a spot on the PL right in the middle of the floor. And somewhere out there on the floor is a pencil eraser moving around. And you have to find it in the midst of choppy seas and clouds and no idea where it's coming from. And you have about 16 to 18 hours to do it. And your speed of movement is limited to as fast as your planes can fly. And they can only fly so far before they have to turn around and come back. Right? We got lucky. We ran into some of them. They still got some attack planes off and did some damage on Midway, but we stopped them and we sunk one of their carriers. And that will be the last offensive action by the Japanese in the Pacific. So Midway is not midway through the war in the Pacific. It happens pretty early in 1942, but it is a huge turning point. The Japanese are done acquiring territory. So we then begin to put into place our island hopping campaign. We go from one strategic island to another. And you know a lot of the names. Guadalcanal is a significant one. It was about the largest amphibious invasion we did in the Pacific up to that point. And it was a brutally, toughly defended island. The Navy is commanded by Admiral Chester Nimitz. And he and MacArthur aren't the best of buds, but they have to work together. Again, we don't have jets and massive transport airplanes, so if the soldiers need to get somewhere, their options are swim or the Navy gets you there. And the Navy has multiple roles. One, they have to get scouts there to map the islands and the beaches and figure out how they're going to attack. Two, they have to get there and bombard the island and try and soften up the defenses. Three, they have to get the soldiers in under covering fire. Four, they got to wait while the soldiers establish their beachhead, and then they got to drop the supplies off for them. And five, they have to patrol to make sure the Japanese aren't sending reinforcements and attempting to retake the island. All the soldiers have to do is go in under withering artillery and machine gun fire and booby traps and take the island, so. It is a massive effort on the part of both the Army and Marines and the Navy. Guadalcanal is a very, very deadly island. It's very difficult to take. Pretty much a 6-day continuous assault. Iwo Jima, is very famous. The black volcanic sands. The long field of fire from the deeply entrenched Japanese forces. They had burrowed into the volcanic island. And I don't care how big of a shell you lob from your battleship, your cruiser, your destroyer, you weren't getting very deep into that volcanic rock. And the Japanese were so heavily entrenched, they were still bringing them out of the jungle months after we had taken the island. You've all seen the pictures of the raising the American flag on Mount Suribachi. Yes? Maybe? It wasn't staged. They sent soldiers up and said, raise the flag. And they went up, but they took a small flag, and the general was like, here's a bigger one, get it up there. And so a photographer was there with the first one and took a picture. And that photographer heard the general issue the order for the second one, and he follows him up there and just happened to take that picture as they were raising it. And his made it back to the States before the other guys, and it was just so perfectly framed. And no, it wasn't staged. Okay, Battle of the Coral Sea. Battle of the Coral Sea is one of the most epic naval battles to that point. It is the first naval battle where the ships don't see each other. Used to be ships would kind of do like drive-bys, sail-bys, sail by each other and fire. Now we have aircraft carriers, and the planes are always out looking for the enemy fleet, and they find each other, and the whole battle is my planes against their planes, my planes against their ships, their planes against my ships. The ships don't ever fire on each other, and that's the first naval battle of that kind, where the ships never saw each other over the curvature of the earth. Okay. It is a pretty good stop on the part of the Navy. They keep the Japanese from actually even getting to where they were going to invade. The real decisive battle of the Pacific in terms of the Navy is the Battle of Leyte Gulf. I don't have it up here. It's Leyte. Leyte is in the Philippines, Leyte Gulf. That is pretty much the end of the Japanese Navy in the Pacific. I mean, they've got a few ships and stuff, but they can't even put together a squadron after the Battle of Leyte Gulf. We cleaned them out. The Battle of Leyte Gulf is also significant because it's the first time we see the Japanese using kamikazes. Kamikaze means divine wind. These are essentially suicide pilots. And here's why they use them. They have limited supplies. We've been hitting their factories. Their manpower is being depleted. And it takes some serious time to train a pilot. Flying is not easy. You can build a plane that's easy to take off and fly. Teaching someone to precision bomb, how to plan your path, how to account for wind speed and your own airspeed and the weight of the projectile and how it will fall, all of that requires months and months and months of training. Well, as Japanese pilots have been increasingly shot down, they can't make more pilots fast enough. They're still able to make some planes, but they can't make more pilots. But it's fairly simple to train somebody to take a plane up and fly it. And so what they do is they load the bombs on the planes, and the pilots know they're going to their death. And being Japanese, that's hugely honorable. The whole family is honored. It's a tremendous thing to have a kamikaze son. And so this is also pretty demoralizing to our guys on these ships, because a bomb could miss, a torpedo could miss. You might be able to shoot down a plane that has to follow a certain path in order to be able to drop a torpedo or a bomb on your plane or on your boat, ship, and you could be able to shoot it down. Kamikazes can fly any which way, and as long as they crash on your vessel, they got it. Now, vessels today have steel decks. World War II, teak, wood. If you crash a plane, what do you have in addition to the plane? Aviation fuel that burns. And about the worst thing you can have at sea is a fire on your ship. It's awful. Okay? So, Leyte Gulf, we're going to see him again at Okinawa. It's ugly. One of the last islands before they got to the home islands was the island of Saipan. It's not up here, it's Saipan. The Japanese understood that it was inevitably coming that the U.S. was going to invade their home islands. And they wanted to do everything they could to slow that down. So they start arming their civilians and training them in what they call the home guard. And they use propaganda on their civilians. As our soldiers are invading the island of Saipan, the last island before the Japanese home islands, the civilians are committing mass suicide. The Japanese had convinced them that the women and daughters would be raped and that the American soldiers would kill and eat their babies, that they would force the elderly into labor camps and kill them. And so they taught the civilians that the honorable way to die was either suicide or to take Americans with you. And so we have actual footage from combat photographers of Japanese women, children, elderly, going to the cliffs of Saipan and throwing themselves onto the rocks below to avoid the atrocities that they had been told would happen. Women carrying their children in their arms, fighting toddlers behind them and throwing them off. So that's pretty powerful propaganda, huh? So when it comes time to plan this invasion of the home islands, and Okinawa is the first one we hit, it's the furthest south, we again face the civilian issue. The fighting is unbelievably fierce. Over 400,000 Japanese killed, almost 300,000 Americans killed and wounded. We've got the kamikazes going on. The civilians are committing suicide. It was awful. There aren't adjectives for it. President Roosevelt has died. President Truman has since been told about the Manhattan Project. He's been told that 3 bombs were built. 1 was tested. Roosevelt was informed of its success while he was at Yalta. There have been cities that haven't been being bombed in Japan so that they'll be able to take before and after photos and know how effective this brand new weapon is. Truman says, no, let's figure this out. Let's think about it. He says, I want estimates. Casualties, fatalities on both sides if we have to launch an amphibious invasion into the rest of Japan. What's it going to take? And then how much damage do you think this new weapon will do? We firebombed Tokyo and lots of other Japanese cities.